One of the main risks that you take as an activist is that you may experience repression. Repression refers to efforts by the government or others to contain or stop protests or movements. Common examples of repression include arrest and violence from police at protests, but repression is not always this obvious, and it does not only come from the state. Social movement research has yielded many insights about the causes, consequences, and dynamics of repression that may help you as an activist to avoid repression, to mitigate its harm to your movement, or even to use it to your advantage. Several studies have examined what makes some movements or protests more likely to be repressed than others. If your aim is to avoid repression, then this literature can be read as a sort of guide of what not to do. For example, a very consistent finding is that more threatening protests or movements are more likely to be repressed. One of the strongest and most consistent predictors of repression is the use of confrontational tactics, as well as engaging in violence or property destruction. Of course, some scholars and activists alike argue that more disruptive tactics are also more effective, so many still opt to use such tactics even with the higher risk of repression that comes with them. Other factors that research suggests may increase the likelihood of repression, such as having people of color in a movement, are not things that most movements could or would want to change in order to reduce the risk of repression. But being aware of these findings can still help inform a more prepared response. Furthermore, repression sometimes happens when it's least expected. In fact, meting out more repression than is expected or that seems warranted given the threat is actually a strategy the government uses sometimes to overwhelm and demobilize a movement. So you should not expect to be able to completely mitigate the risk of repression. If you are engaging in street protests or other forms of contentious politics, you should anticipate the possibility that you may be arrested, hurt, or experience some other form of repression if you have not already. Acknowledging and preparing for this possibility is one of the best ways to make sure that your movement is not deterred by it. Which brings me to the second major area of social movement research on repression, the impact of repression on social movements. There is evidence that in some cases, repression is effective, meaning that it has a chilling effect on dissent and a deterrent effect on individual participants. In other cases, it backfires and actually strengthens a movement or radicalizes participants. Perhaps you have seen examples of both in people or groups that you've worked with, or even in the same individual or in yourself. Research has identified many different factors that help explain when these divergent consequences of repression are most likely to occur. And many of these are things that you as an activist cannot control, but I will focus on the things that you do have some control over. As I alluded to earlier, preparation is key. Studies have found that when activists are mentally and logistically prepared to experience repression, it causes less damage than when it does occur compared with when they don't see it coming. Trainings or meetings before actions to discuss the risks and how to respond in the event of arrest, pain compliance tactics by police, or other possibilities may help ensure that repression does not have a chilling effect on future protests. Plans for jail solidarity, street medics, and legal observers and legal support networks in place before actions are important ways that movements help individuals experiencing repression to feel supported by others and to spread the cost of repression around so they don't fall on just a few individuals. Similarly, opportunities to debrief and get emotional support may be helpful to many after experiencing an arrest or violence from police or some other form of repression. And finally, activists can try to publicize and frame instances of repression in ways that increase support for the movement and can, in some cases, use the drama that repression creates to bring attention to the cause and shame to their targets. Again, knowing that repression is a possibility and preparing for it is likely key to being able to spin it in a way that will benefit the movement. Research on what activists and movements can do in response to repression is still relatively new compared with other areas of research on repression, but I hope that some of these ideas are helpful to you. Below, I include some links to further reading on this topic.